There is this really interesting debate going on around homelessness, and it centers around what is the cause. And because that cause is up in the air, it determines what people do afterwards. And as a result, we kind of have these two different approaches, and maybe one is working and one isn't. I mean, because after all, if you have the cause wrong, your solution is not going to work. And it's around the fact that some people see the main driver of homelessness as affordable housing. There's the other camp that looks at it as more kind of, behavioral issues, which is the area that I'm in. Now, to be fair, I have to, consider the fact that I am new to the game. I don't have, tons of experience because I got a PhD in psychology and I've been working with homeless people forever. My background is 20 plus years as a software developer and project manager. At the same time, what I'm doing and how I'm applying solutions in homelessness and other areas that I work with is very similar to what I do to what I did as a software engineer. And that's really, a solid approach to start with. Here's why. When you're creating a software system, you go through a very methodical process to figure out what procedure you're going to automate. And that's essentially what software does. The key thing is that when you actually come up with a solution, number one, it has to be unbiased. And number two, it has to be comprehensive. And that's kind of one of the keys here, because maybe just fixing part of a solution is something that people can do in the social sciences. But from a software standpoint, you can't do that, because if you come up with a use case that someone is trying to do with your software and it's not available, that completely destroys the system and potentially undermines the whole product altogether. Anyway, getting back to the solution at hand. It was during this time in corporate America when I started to develop my kind of behavioral approach. And after I left that and started up my wellness company, it's when I refined it and actually came up with this algorithm that I apply to behavior. And it's really interesting because it not only applies to potential people who are experiencing homelessness, but also the people who are trying to administer solutions. Okay, so here's kind of the key thing. Is it affordable housing? Is it, behavioral? When you look at the factors of what drives homelessness, there's at least a dozen, and plenty of things that people might be not going to consider, and stuff I've talked about in a previous video. But kind of the key thing is that when you look at those drivers of homelessness, you realize that they're really all behavioral oriented, right? Addiction, gambling, PTSD, even someone who's fleeing abuse. Because while the person who's fleeing abuse doesn't have a behavioral issue, the person who is abusing has a problem with their behavior. But anyway, so one of the smoking guns that I feel that are support the whole behavior option, the explanation, is the fact that if you look at those experiencing homelessness, men are twice as likely to be homeless as women. However, men represent a little less than half of the population. I think it's like 49% versus 51%. They also represent a slight majority of people who are employed. And again, I think it's like 48%. So really close, but nonetheless, there's a slight direction in the males area. In addition, men on average make 1.25% more, so 25% more than a woman. If you look at all those numbers and you add them up, the likelihood that a woman should experience homelessness is greater. And it should actually be the flip of what it is. So instead of women experiencing homelessness twice as often as men, it is the opposite. And that kind of starts to suggest, well, maybe it isn't an affordability issue. And to me, it really is the smoking gun, because there's no other way to explain it. Men, as we kind of all know, can be belligerent at times. They can be difficult to work with. Then that would eliminate or reduce their ability to be employed, because they keep getting fired because they don't get along with other people. And it would also undermine their ability to live with other people. Because if you think about it, people who are on that affordability, index, if they're stressed trying to make rent, well, instead of having a one-bedroom apartment, it would be cheaper for them to rent a two-bedroom apartment, and probably even cheaper to rent a house with 3 or 4 other people. But if their personality gets in the way of that, and that's a behavior problem, well, that would reduce an option to them to live more cheaply. So anyway, that is kind of like the big debate that's going on in homelessness. The stance that I'm taking for all my projects is that it is a behavior issue. And when you look at the current solutions to homelessness, and there's a great paper by Central City Concern on, I think it's supportive engaged housing. And basically what they've come up with is this this conclusion that the housing first model is not working. And what Housing First says is that before you can help a person with these behavior issues or whatever other issues that they're dealing with, for example, like homelessness or PTSD and so on, which really are all, behavior related, that you put them in a house first and then you go ahead and deliver these wraparound services. Well, there's two or three problems, depending on how you look at it. The first one is we're kind of not filtering people, right? So there's a limited amount of affordable housing or supportive housing that's available. If we're not looking at what they're currently at and just kind of making it low barrier as it's called, well then we're potentially putting people in there who aren't as ready to improve. And we're not filtering out, let's set aside the people who are more difficult and help those who are ready for change. That's one issue. Second issue is the fact that there is a huge unmet need for behavioral health care in general. That certainly extends to those experiencing homelessness even more so. So while they talk about housing first, hey, get them into a shelter and then start to give them these wraparound services. Those wraparound services usually aren't present, and that's a huge problem. The third issue is the fact that there are times when you get people into supportive housing and they do have these behavior problems, they cause problems with other people in the community. So even if you house like 100 people, and let's say less than 10% of them are a problem, let's say 5% are, right? You have 5 people who could potentially ruin the whole complex, the whole apartment area because of their behavior. They're loud, they're causing fights with others, conflict and so on. So the issue really, even if you're looking at the housing first model, which is starting to be questioned, there's a lot of people, including Central City Concern, which is saying the housing first model may not be working, and we don't think it is. And really the key to making this all work is behavioral wellness. Hence, this is what is behind my whole crusade. It's kind of stuff I had kind of surmised all along. Granted, I do potentially have a self-serving solution because I am a behavioral wellness person. But that being said, certainly all the evidence suggests that what we're doing, which is housing first and shelter-based, is not working because homelessness is increasing each year. And even the people who are getting, shelters aren't necessarily staying in them. People who are getting into supportive housing are leaving them, going back on the streets. There's a whole bunch of behavior-related stuff that says the way that we're doing it now is not meeting our needs, and more importantly, that we're deficient even in the current approach. So even with the housing first approach, it's not behavioral health care. I say we shouldn't be doing housing first. We should come up with a way to start doing behavioral wellness, and since emotional alignment can't scale, that's something that I can do. So there you go. There's this big housing behavioral wellness debate, and in my estimation, I don't want to develop real estate. I want to develop people. That's why I think behavioral wellness really is going to be the solution to ending homelessness, especially here in Portland.